Alright, welcome back. I actually realized that I didn't quite finish what I wanted to say in the last tutorial. And I really didn't get across this idea enough that it doesn't really matter how this protocol is implemented, the delegate protocol, just that it is implemented. So what we did was a really basic type of implementation of the Lil Debbie delegate protocol. We defined a blunt for Debbie as some kind of a Cali weed blunt, real basic, and then we defined the pass blunt as a real basic type of function where we're simply returning the blunt that we've got. But really, for something to adhere to this Lil Debbie delegate protocol, all it means is that it must have a blunt, and then it must be able to pass the blunt. What happens in the process of passing the blunt? Who knows? The blunt could come from a totally different source. Maybe it comes from some other type of process that we come to acquire the blunt. And so what we're actually going to do is we're going to define another class that adheres to the same protocol, the Lil Debbie delegate protocol, but perhaps implements the protocol in a different way. And so would therefore come to pass a blunt to Lil Debbie just in a slightly different manner, in a more nuanced manner. And so we're actually going to call this other class a ratchet. And this ratchet conforms to the Lil Debbie delegate protocol. It has a blunt for Debbie, just as any delegate, Lil Debbie delegate must. But we're not going to actually define the type of blunt right at the outset, so we're just going to pass nothing into it. That's what this nil is. Then we're going to define our pass blunt function in a slightly different way. So instead of just passing this regular blunt that we ordinarily have, a ratchet, say, randomly gets some kind of a crappier type of blunt from an array of possible blunt types. So we'll say var possible blunt types of type array equals this open bracket for an array. And the first thing we'll have here is swag, all right, and then some blunt from a hooker, and then I don't know, bottom barrel kush. Ironically, I'm sure that maybe the kush at the bottom of the barrel is like the best or some, I have no idea. But so we've got three possible types of blunt, okay, that are in an array, and then we're going to actually get some, we're going to create a random index for that array, which is just going to be some kind of an integer, so that we're always kind of grabbing a random blunt to pass off to Lil Debbie. So we're going to say var random number of type int equals. Now this is actually a function that's defined within the compiler, and it's arc for random uniform, and we're just going to pass 3 in there. Okay. So what does this do? Well, basically what it does, this arc for random uniform with 3 passed in, is it generates a random number between 0 and 2. So that random number is either 0, 1, or 2. Great, because the index 0 right here gives us swag. Index 1 gives us some blunt from a hooker. Okay, and then index 2 gets us bottom barrel kush. So no matter what, which of these random numbers is ultimately generated from this random number function, we will always have some type of a blunt in our array of possible blunt types to match to that index. So we're going to actually create a string called the blunt type. It's a type string. And that string is equal to possible blunt types at index random number. Okay. Real simple. We've got our blunt type. So then we just want to redefine the blunt for Debbie as the standard blunt constructor with the type of blunt being passed in as this blunt type. which is really our random blunt type. So now we've redefined, before we even pass the blunt off to Little Debbie, we're grabbing a random blunt from our possible blunt type array. And then we return the blunt for Debbie. Okay, so zooming out, we have two possible classes here that conform to the Little Debbie delegate protocol. It's just that the way that they pass the blunt off to Little Debbie is slightly nuanced and different. A basic bitch right here, a standard type of bitch, just passes off some of that Cali weed. Doesn't really modify it, doesn't really do anything with it, but just simply passes off the Cali weed to Debbie. Okay? A ratchet, on the other hand, has an array of choices of rather bottom barrel types of blunts to be passing to Debbie. You know, maybe she's got a friend who's, you know, some kind of a hooker and just randomly has, you know, a blunt, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just that it's a slightly nuanced, it's a little bit of a different way of implementing the same function of passing a blunt. In this case, we're having a random number generator create a random number, and we're using that random number as an index for an array of possible blunt types that we're then going to pass off to Little Debbie. Okay, so we've got all this stuff defined. It's really cool, but now what we need to do here is actually swap out Debbie's main bitch, because now Debbie's main bitch is no longer going to be a bitch, but is actually going to be a ratchet. Okay, and that's all we got to do is just use the ratchet constructor there, and Lil Debbie's main bitch becomes a ratchet. All right, cool. So this is interesting. One thing that we'll notice right here in our output is that this got executed, and we have a random number, and that random number is 2. So what that means is that the index for this array is 2. And that, as we said, this is 0, swag. This is 1, some blunt from Hooker. 2 is bottom barrel Kush. So what we would expect is our blunt type to become bottom barrel Kush. In this case, that's what it says here. So if we go to this console output, here it says, Lil Debbie got a blunt from her delegate of type bottom barrel Kush. Lil Debbie's blunt is of type bottom barrel Kush. Remember, all that we did here was we defined a different class that adheres to the Little Debbie delegate protocol. It implements the Little Debbie delegate protocol kind of in its own way. You know, a ratchet is a different type of class of bitch, really, if you think about it. And ratchets have a slightly different way of acquiring the same blunt that they might pass off to Little Debbie. So these are important things to take into consideration with a delegate protocol. All that it really means for something to adhere to this particular delegate protocol is for it to have a blunt and pass a blunt. Anything can have, there are innumerable ways in existence to have a blunt, to acquire a blunt, to pass a blunt off to one another. All that's important is that if you're going to be one of Lil Debbie's bitches, if you're going to follow the Lil Debbie delegate protocol, you must be able to pass some kind of a blunt off to Lil Debbie. Now, once again, getting back to kind of a larger scope type of actual programming sort of use for this thing, in many cases, there are delegate protocols defined in the frameworks that you use in Xcode that say, okay, if you're going to say that this thing is let's say it's a picker delegate, okay, and it needs to, you know, the little pick wheel thing, that pick wheel thing needs to be getting some of its selections or the little options in the picker from some kind of an object that conforms to a picker delegate protocol. So maybe what it's doing is it's having an array of things that it grabs those names from. Okay, and then what we do is we pass off the array as the selections for the picker. Okay, so it's not all that different, really, from passing off blunts to Debbie. All that it matters is that we have some class that implements the protocol, and it implements that protocol in whatever way it possibly can. That's all it means for it to be a delegate, is to implement the functions, to have the thing to pass, the data or the blunt. Either way, that's basically what's going on. And actually in the future, we will create an application that does something like that. So you'll kind of get a feel for, okay, Theo's not just, joking around here with Lil Debbie and her delegates passing blunts, but I sort of feel like it is a rather good analogy of what it is. We talk about delegates, but we rarely ever put it in this context of, here's an actual delegate. Like Lil Debbie has real delegates, like real people that are her bitches that pass blunts to her. And so it kind of brings it more into the real world, and instead of this sort of abstract kind of world that is typically computer programming, or at least in my opinion. In any case, if you like this tutorial, share it with your friends. If you got a laugh, that's great. Subscribe, do whatever, and I'll see you with another tutorial soon.